this thing is being so stupid today. The other version of cognitive behavioral therapy is put together by a guy, last name is Beck. It's referred to as Beck's cognitive therapy. And it rests on the assumption that the client has formed some negative thoughts about themselves and the world around them. Why is all of this always happening to me? This always happens. Then it also looks for the exceptions to the rule, because there is nothing that occurs that is always, with the exception of things like ocean tides and the sun, quote unquote, rising and the moon rising or falling. Those things are always. But generally speaking, nothing else happens, quote, always. The activating behaviors are some of those things that get in the way. And in the process of that, we have to learn how to figure out what it is we're thinking about something. And then when we get conscious enough about that, then we can alter how it is we respond to those behaviors, either our own or those given to us by other people. So it's a matter, again, of your own level of awareness. And as rude as this may sound, most people I know are not overly self-aware. Now, you can be. It doesn't take much, but you have to be willing to look at a couple of places in your world to see if there might be some places when you don't always do quite as well as you might think. So that gets you through the cognitive versions, but that really is about reorganizing how people think about something, which is why it's called cognitive. It has to do with cognition and how we think. There's therapies related to groups or to families or couples. Not all of those are the same, but a lot of the interactions you have with a group or with a couple or with a full family system are similar to how people reorganize their thoughts related to how they deal with other individuals as single folks. In other words, the things that I would teach a couple to say to one another, the same thing I'm going to teach my client from yesterday to talk to her mother, who keeps telling her that she is mentally ill, which, by the way, is not helpful. So if you know someone who has a particular emotional or cognitive concern, telling them that they're mentally ill is not going to be overly helpful. Reminding them on a consistent basis, oh, honey, you're just mentally ill. That's not really how that goes. That's not helpful either. Bear in mind, if somebody has a challenge of some sort, it's a challenge for him or her. It may not be a challenge for you, but it still may be a challenge for him or her. If you deal with couples and families, when you're dealing with a family specifically, you get as many people involved in that family as you can into the therapy room. All of them. You want to get, if you can get Grammy, get her to come too. Get grandpa, grandma, aunts, uncles, whoever is willing to show up for a family therapeutic intervention, bring them all. Bring them all. You'll find that families will typically blame their children. They'll show up to therapy and say, little Johnny is misbehaving something terrible. He probably is. I'm not disagreeing with the fact that little Johnny may be misbehaving. But what children often do, children often pick up on the stress in the family system and act it out. What that paraphrases or translates into, mom and dad are having a problem and little Johnny acts a fool. That's how that works. He picks up on that particular issue and helps manifest it. That's how family systems work. They look for scapegoats. Somebody else is to blame for the system's problem. You could do the same thing in a classroom. Let's say you've got a classroom that's got 50 people in it. You have 2 people sitting in the middle or in the back or wherever else who always insist on being chatty. There's one way to deal with that, well, a handful of ways to deal with that. But those 2 people are the people who are holding up the class, as an example. Now, in a family, everybody's looking for someone to blame for the family problem, whatever happens, because it's certainly not my fault. I'm the dad. I don't have any issues in the family. I've got all my crap together. Mom is not going to say, oh, I'm the one with the issue. Little Johnny doesn't know any different because little Johnny's 10 or 12 and just picks up on the stress and acts weirdly, acts out in some way or other, becomes openly defiant or whatever, depressed, who knows. And the challenge with that is that the child then becomes what's called the identified patient. Then the therapist has to be mindful of what may be going on and point the finger where it actually goes in a way that's appropriate. Well, little Johnny acts this way. We'll talk about little Johnny in a little while. How are things going with y'all? Little Johnny may have his issues, and I'm happy to talk about those, but let's talk about you first. get a family talking with itself about some of its potential challenges, and you'll see some of the stress level begin to lower in some way. When that stress level lowers, chances are, statistically, that the child's behavior will level off. Now, here's a couple of ripples, a couple of exceptions to that rule. The family has to be willing to accept its own responsibility for the whole system's behavior. Children don't run family, let me rephrase. Often children are allowed to run family systems, but who's supposed to be running the family system are the people who are the primary caregivers in that family system, not little Bessie. Little Bessie is not in charge of your family if you're dealing with it from a therapeutic perspective. That's a behavioral issue that refers back to the parents or the caregivers, not little Bessie.
I have a question.
I'll try.
Is it challenging to, or do you ever meet with like just the parents and not the kid in there? Because it seems like there should be times you should talk about stuff without the kid being there.
A lot of that will depend on the age of the child. If the child is old enough within reason to manage some of that with a little bit of help, with some paraphrasing or whatever else, I'd probably leave the kid in the room. If at first I'm absolutely positive that Johnny's got nothing to do with this, I'm going to keep Johnny out of the way. And then what's going to happen after I spend time with the parents, however long they're willing to do that, and we get those challenges fixed, then I'll probably bring Johnny back into the mix and give him some tools in front of them so they know what's happening, and with them as well so they can figure out how to communicate more appropriately with little Johnny or whoever. The challenge is to empower people to communicate themselves well. It is okay to feel whatever it is you feel, good, bad, or indifferent. You can be angry, and I'm happy for you to be angry. Punching holes in my wall is not the way to deal with your agitation. That's not going to help anybody. That's only going to piss off who's ever in charge of the wall. What do you do with your children when they slam your doors? Typically. What's your first response with it? That's probably not the best question. I know what my response is. What are you going to do to your kids when they slam the door? Yell at them? Take the door off the hinges. They won't slam it again. Try that. Take the door out of the way. Try, and I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm sorry? That's one of the interesting pieces. It can. See, and again, it is going to vary depending on some of the other challenges as a part of that. You know, how old is he?
He's 10.
How old is she?
12.
Oh. Let me think about that when it come back around.
I mean, I get a call from the school every day.
For him or for one of them?
For him. But my girls are fine. My girls are perfect, like straight A students, like all academic awards, and then, well, there's Jacoby. No family issues. Husband and I get along perfectly fine. We don't argue. Nothing. Little boy has anything and everything he wants.
How many children do you have?
3.
Is he the youngest?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And he says he hates home because there's so many girls.
We only,
Like,
And
he's
that's-
ready to run away and everything. And
Sure.
like I said, the police officer lives right there on the corner, so if you run away, he'll bring you right back.
that's good. That's a good boundary. It used to be the joke at our house. We didn't have a male dog until the dog we have right now. I brought a 3-year-old daughter to the marriage. She brought a dog that was a female. Buried that one. Had another one that was also a female. Buried that one. And then we ended up with this male. You know what? When this one dies, we'll either go back to a female or no dog. Males are stupid. When it comes, at least this male dog is stupid. But he's also king of the roost, which is also has its own comical issue. But we'll come back around to that in a minute. The things, getting back to the family thing, you help people reorganize the structure of the system if that's necessary, especially if the system has gotten a little off a kilter and children are running the show. That's not how family systems are designed to work. Caregivers are supposed to be in charge, theoretically. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have a kid running a system who knows how to do that, but he won't be doing it consciously. The idea is to empower grown-ups with the ability to think through the process and to alter behavior to get what everybody needs, or at the very least, what they think they want. Slamming a door is probably not going to get him what he wants, right? That's not going to get him anything. One other way to deal with something like that, if you can stand it long enough, is to ignore the behavior that prompts that anyway. It's called, that's,
So I got so mad at me on Saturday. I was using a dry erase board and I had a lit candle on the kitchen table. And he slammed that dry erase board on the candle, wax went everywhere, it was still lit, laying on the carpet now. I really kinda wanted to kill him.
that's reasonable. I probably would have helped you.
Some kids don't care about taking stuff, like.
No, they don't.
He doesn't care at all. We take him out of baseball, we take him out of basketball, we take him to the practices, so he can sit there and watch everybody, we take him to the games, so it's kinda like, you can't play, cause he's a star player. He doesn't care.
That means that part doesn't work. I had a child
But
like that.
nothing works.
I had a child like that.
I mean, nothing. I really think it's like authority when it comes to women, because he doesn't do this to men.
Ah, see, that's another piece of the puzzle. See the kind of information you learn when you talk to the whole system or other parts of the system. You might find out all kinds of things.
'Cause
That's
he has no
probably
respect
true.
For me, but to dad, he's like, yes, sir, no, sir.
Uh-huh.
And then dad does offshore drilling, so he's here 21 days, gone 21 days. Those 21 days he's gone, it's like I'm paying you back for every day I had.
Every day I was nice, here comes two more.
Yep.
How do you folks over there in Vernon deal with all kinds of strange issues that come up in the family system? Besides texting them.
So do people usually get referred to family therapy, or they
Hang on.
choose?
Go ahead. Short answer to your question is no. A lot of it will depend on, I don't know that I've ever had a family who was referred. I've dealt with a handful of families, but not families that someone said, oh, y'all need to go get some work done. I do know that when I was doing my own therapy, well, when Rebecca and I did our own therapy, we took everybody once or twice because the therapist said, bring them all. So we did. And it didn't take us long to figure out where the challenge was. And there were some challenges with the way Rebecca and I related, which manifested itself with my older child. We fixed that, and then she didn't have any other place to act that out, and it stopped. That and setting some very definitive boundaries about what we were going to allow and what we weren't. You know, she slammed the door once. I took it off the hinges. She asked me, and I said it right there by her doorway. And she asked me how long I was going to leave it there. I said, till I get tired. And I went back downstairs and forgot about it. I forgot all about it. About 3 months later, I went upstairs, which means I hadn't been upstairs in 3 months to either one of their rooms. I went upstairs and happened to notice it and said, oh, maybe I ought to put that back on the hinges. So I did. Had forgotten all about it. She never asked about it. She learned to live with the door gone and managed. And she didn't like it. But there was also a time when a handprint would show up on my younger child's back. Now, I wonder how that handprint got there. I didn't smack her. Rebecca didn't smack her. I didn't smack her, Dad. No, I'm sure you didn't. Your hand just jumped up off your body and smacked her upside the head and moved on to something else. And then came and attached itself back to your body. Yeah, something like that, or whatever. It was those sorts of behaviors that were undeniable about certain things going on in the house that we had to deal with one at a time. And we had to learn how to speak plainly, to set very, very carefully orchestrated boundaries and maintain the boundary, even as crazy as it got on occasion. I'm sorry, dinner's between this time and this time. I want a sandwich. Dinner, which is what's prepared, is not a sandwich. Your dinner is this, and it's between this time and this time. I don't want that. It's a long time to breakfast. Did that once or twice, and she figured out she was going to have to eat dinner with the rest of us or not eat. She decided not to eat. That's on her, not me. And it worked. It's interesting to watch her parent. She's got we have a 20-month-old-ish, somewhere along in there, 23, no, 19 or 20-month-old grandbaby. Girlfriend's sharp. She got mama trained. And mama knows she's trained. That's what makes it more comical. We can sit back and watch and say, oh, girlfriend's got your number. I know. No, when she wants to, she's been telling her, what do you do with a child, as an example? And I can make this apply in a therapeutic perspective. What do you do with a child who will take off a dirty diaper and throw it away?
Potty training.
You start potty training real fast. Didn't have a potty. Why don't you go get one? They got to it a couple of 3 weeks later. The hot moment was past. Because then when she finally got the potty at home, she didn't want to do anything except play with it. Didn't want to use it because she had missed her moment. Now, will she get it done? Sure she will. But again, it's about being able to intervene with the appropriate technique at the right time. You can add different sorts of interventions in family therapy they're fun when you're the therapist doing it. It's not fun for the family or for the couple if you're only dealing with a couple. You got a couple who cannot share 15 words together without having a fight. Okay, the next time they fight, they have to fight for 4 hours without stopping. You know what? They'll try to do that once or twice and they won't fight anymore. Because you know how hard it is to fight for 4 hours? Try it sometime with a significant other. Try to argue, scream, yell, and carry on for 4 hours. And see how long they do that. It's just an added intervention. All kinds of fun stuff you can do in therapy that people don't typically think about. It's a matter of knowing what string to pull. And in all fairness, a lot of times therapists become a little more like puppet masters, getting people to behave in a certain way. The challenge is to make sure they understand that the behavior they were exhibiting before is not helping them. They have to get to that point themselves. I can't tell you, that behavior is really stupid and terribly unhelpful, is it not? That doesn't work well. But a better question, how's that working for you? And they go, not too well. Then let's see if we might be able to find something a little more appropriate. They become a little more interested. But families and groups typically have structural issues, at least families and couples have structural issues about who's in charge, who's not, how to equalize power distribution where that's necessary, all that kind of stuff. Now, groups, as individual groups, are put together so that people, in essence, learn how to communicate more effectively within the safety and the confines of a group. You have a group of folks. The last group I was a part of was a group of women. Most of them had some borderline personality issues, which means that they're prone to self-harm. They have terribly roller coaster-like relationships. They're overly dramatic, tend to be somewhat narcissistic, and a couple of other variables. Okay, most of them, all in this particular group, as an example, had been abused in some way at some point in time, or continually over a period of time. One of the people in this group ran over her abuser in her car, intentionally. I will kill you, ran him over. Okay, we're talking about that type of personality, very, very volatile. You get all these women in a room and teach them how to communicate reasonably well with one another. It's kind of fun to watch. Because one of them will be telling you about something and another one will think it's absolutely stupid. And I might think it's absolutely stupid too. But am I going to say, that is dumb? No, somebody in the group might. And then you help them figure out how to communicate that information back and forth with one another in a way that's manageable. What did you hear me say? Well, I heard you say that I was fat and my mother dresses me funny. Well, maybe she did, and maybe you are. There's a better way to put it. And there's better ways to teach people how to communicate those things when it comes to therapeutic intervention. It's actually great fun. Again, but not everybody's into that sort of thing. Couples therapy will typically focus on how people communicate with one another. And they often set up rules for talking. As crazy as that sounds, you can't say that. That's not nice. I didn't say it wasn't true, but it's not nice. And there are ways to teach people how to do that. Again, it's about having a willingness to help them through the process. Now, one of the things that comes up is which type of therapy is better for whoever? Why do people go to therapy, do you think? Just take a stab in the dark.
Things aren't going the way that they want them to.
That's fair. Things aren't going the way they would like them to. Now, she did not say that things are going wrong, but they're not going the way they want them to go. That's a perfectly good reason to come visit with a therapist. Any other thoughts about why somebody would go? for help related to what?
In my situation, it would be my child.
Okay, now is the question going to be about, and if we're, you can always stop me at any time. Now, is that going to be about taking little Johnny to the therapist or about working on yourself first? Okay, now, would you be willing to start with yourself? See, a lot of people won't.
I wanna know how to get my child to that correctly.
You know, and again, part of that is about, and please understand, I'm on the outside of all y'all systems. So what I see, even from what you tell me, I don't want that to sound flippant or that I am trying to minimize your circumstance. I am not. I've had my own family issues with my own kids, and I know they can be terribly debilitating. I have dealt with slammed doors, but I didn't have children sharing rooms, as an example, or whatever else. But at the same time, looking at it from the outside, it seems it will appear differently to me than it does to the people who are inside trying to do their work. But people go to therapists basically because if something is not working well in their world, or there is some kind of emotional something that is so troubling in some way that it's better to go talk to somebody else about it than have to deal with the craziness of how crappy I'm feeling. In other words, people have to hurt badly enough before they'll decide to go talk to anybody else about it. Because they're going to have to go look at somebody and be reasonably vulnerable. Now, that will also take into account that you have a therapist who's willing to tell you that you're full of crap. Because a lot of times, everybody is. And you get to call them on their BS, which is simply their belief system, by the way. Anyway, what we think is what we turn into reality. Bless you. When it comes to a therapeutic perspective, you can think, can you behave yourself into a better way of thinking? Or is it easier to think yourself into a better way of behaving? Try that sometime. Is it easier to think about behaving more appropriately?
Oh, no, behave.
I can behave myself into a better feeling a whole lot faster than the other way around. Try it sometime. But you have to be willing to alter the behavior. And in all fairness, not everybody who comes to therapy is willing to do the work that's necessary to get something productive done. And that's okay. They may not be ready yet. I mean, I've dealt with all kinds. The lady dropping the F-bomb yesterday, her father used to tell her that she was not much count, was always going to be fat. So she helped make that true. She was fat at some point in her life. She's not, but in her early 30s now. She's already had a gastric bypass. I'm still trying to figure out how a doctor managed to pull that off at that age. But what did she do after she got rid of all of her weight? She didn't gain her weight back. She started drinking.
You start what?
Drinking instead. Became an alcoholic. I won't eat, I'll just drink. Been to rehab more than once. Typically, we'd only stay long enough to get sober and leave again. That coping tool wasn't helping either. So she had to come up with something else. Had a professional job here in Wichita Falls. That went to crap. Had an affair, all kinds of fun stuff. Wasn't working for her. Gets rid of her husband. Manages to figure out how they're going to work the child thing out. And you know what? Life has gotten crazy enough that it's probably time to visit with somebody about that. She's got a lot of insight into what some of her challenges are, appears to be very willing to do some of the work. So we'll see. Because it boils down to, how's that working for you? And she'll be perfectly upfront. It sucks. It's not working well at all. Let's see if we can find something else then. But she's willing to do the work, or at least at the moment she appears to be. Will the work get so challenging that she doesn't want to do it anymore? It's possible, but we're not there yet. Not yet. But people go to therapy because they are uncomfortable at some level or other about something. It may be about their own self-image, maybe about their self-confidence, self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is about people who are depressed are concerned that they're not able to control their world. Most of them. Some aspect of their world they cannot control, which makes them depressed. When you cannot control what's happening to you or around you, your initial response emotively is to go inside, because that's how we manage. When we go inside and don't have any outlet, then those things become a little more of a struggle. They have to figure out how to get out. You can't manage them internally forever. But when it comes to how we deal with which one is best for which person, the challenge is more about the person, not the therapy. Do you pick a modality of therapy? In other words, would I pick a modality of therapy because of my personality? Would I decide to treat people with a certain model because this is how I roll? Sometimes. Should I be prepared and able to adjust that if it's necessary and another model works a little more appropriately? Sure. But again, that becomes about the client, which is what the whole process is about anyway, and establishing the relationship, because that is what it is that moves the process along, not so much the technique. But in all fairness, would you really care if I treated you this, as long as I'm being nice, if I used solution-focused therapy or cognitive-based therapy? Would you care? Would you know the difference?
Nope.
They're very different. One of them's much more short-term oriented and is not so concerned with how you think about something, but a little more concerned about how it is you're going to behave. The other one is much more about how you think about your behavior so that you can adjust your thought, then change your behavior. With solution-focused therapy, it's kind of like you start acting like you want to be. You don't want to be depressed? Act happy. Fake it till you make it. You'd be surprised how well that works with some folks. One of the wonderful questions that comes up in solution-focused therapy is what's called a miracle question. If you were to go to sleep tonight and you wake up tomorrow and a miracle has occurred overnight and all of your struggle has gone away, what do you look like? How is your world? And you get them to start describing this miraculous place that they live, and then you start asking questions like, why don't you do that? And they'll look at you and say, what do you mean? What part of that did you not understand? I would dress this way. Then why not dress that way? Well, or whatever. I wouldn't be sad. How would you not be sad? And you help them unpack that a little more. And you help them realize that there are ways that they can do certain things if they simply will ponder the possibility of a different way. It goes back to the thing related to permission. Most folks I deal with typically need some permission to do something different than what they've always done. Because doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a better result each time, is the perfect definition of crazy. It's not helpful. Like I told you with the error message, if you get an error message and you do the same thing over again, expecting the error message to go away, you're just going to get pissed off. The error message is not going away. You have to do something else to make it fit. Again, it's about how you look at your circumstance. If you want to know something about or more about therapeutic intervention, sure, do a little bit of research. But the ultimate question that people are dealing with is their own level of comfort with themselves. Think about any problem you might go to therapy over, regardless of what it is. At some level, what that therapy is going to involve is you being comfortable with some aspect of yourself and how you're responding to some circumstance outside of yourself. How I do it and how you do it are going to be very different, and that's okay. Again, the challenge is about the relationship. You're going to find some cultures that don't do therapy. There'll be some folks that tell you, oh, my people don't do that. Sometimes that's true. Now, the challenge is that you'll find somebody on occasion who's willing to try. What they tell you is wrong may not be wrong for them. As an example, and we can get a little bit of verification here. In a black family, someone comes to me who's depressed but has conversation with a deceased grandmother, that's not going to bother me. I won't think twice about that. But they're hearing or seeing things that aren't there. No, they're not. They may be very present for them. But for at least black Western Americans, to visit or have conversation with relatives who have passed on is normal, not uncommon at all. Grandma comes and checks on how mama is dealing with their children and all that kind of stuff. Check it out. Hispanic males are not going to come to therapy. Never had one, ever. Will their wives come? Maybe.
Why?
Why what?
Why won't they come?
The machismo thing. Men just, that's beneath them. They don't have emotional concerns like that. The women are supposed to do what they're told anyway. And if they don't, that's a different problem. If I'm a Hispanic or Latino male, I'm gonna come home and give my money to the woman I'm living with, if I'm living with one, and I have children, and she's gonna manage my household, because that's what she's supposed to do. I don't have a problem. Whatever problem we happen to have is your fault. The macho thing, that really is alive and well in some cultures.
All Mexicans aren't the jungle.
I didn't say that.
Basically.
I did not. No, ma'am. You should know, I'm not that foolish.
Basically.
Mm-mm. I spoke in general terms, broad brushstroke. Oh, no. I'm not that crazy. And I'm also being very specific about the location. My broad brushstroke is going to be related to people predominantly in Mexico. I'm not telling you folks who have moved and adjusted to different cultural perspectives. It may not work that way. Exactly. A lot of it depends. But other, Asian cultures are a great example of how, not cooperative, what's the word? Western culture, American culture specifically, is very individualistic. It's all about me and mine. I'm gonna get mine, right? Mama's not gonna tell me what to do. I'm grown. She's not gonna tell me where I'm gonna work. She's not gonna tell me what I'm gonna do when I grow up. Anything like that. Oh no. Western Americans are going to say, well, heck no, mama's not going to tell me none of that. Go to Eastern cultures. They are much more family oriented, and the society is much more important than the individual. If mom and dad decide that Billy Joe is going to be a doctor, he's going to be a doctor, unless he's willing to step outside his family and be disowned. He will submit to the system, not the other way around. Now, most folks I know in America look at that and go, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We're not going to be told what we're going to do. Not at all. But that's very normal in that culture. If I'm going to do therapy with someone who's from an Eastern culture like that, I need to know how that works. If I don't know, I have to be crazy enough to ask, what do you need? How does that work? And I'm a fan of being ignorant. I don't know nearly as much as some people think I do, and I'm not afraid to ask. Tell me how that works for you. Like I told you about dealing with folks, with homosexual individuals. What's it like to be you? Just don't ask unless you're ready to hear the answer. They'll tell you sometimes. But again, it's about what is more important for the client. There's some ethical issues that come up. As an example, therapists should not have sex with their clients. That's really, really, really important. Don't do that. That will get you in trouble. So at some point, somebody's going to narc you out. Somebody will narc you out. And all they have to do is send a letter to a group of people in Austin, at least in this state. It's to Austin, and all hell will break loose in your world. You'll get a letter from some folks down in Austin that say, I want this, I want these records, and I want these documents, and I want them in the next 5 minutes.
So why would you want to? They're already going through something. What can they do?
Think about it for a second. There's a huge, I'm sorry?
I said, why do coaches sleep with their,
They're not sleeping.
Have sex.
They're not sleeping. They're not sleeping. Why, let's talk about it from the coach's perspective. Why do coaches do that?
Sick.
Because they're sick?
Yeah.
Why else besides being ill? Don't miss the obvious answer.
they're attracted to someone who's young and,
Maybe. It could be about being attractive. More times than not, it's about the power differential. It's power. It's power. And a therapist, if a therapist is having any sort of sexual relationship with a client, that's about power. Now, it also speaks to some significant issues related to the therapist. Are there some things the therapist probably needs to work out? Now, I'm not saying that a therapist cannot think that a client is attractive. I'm not so stupid as to say that. Even if they are, that doesn't mean that it's appropriate to go be sexual with them. That's about me, not about the client. Even if the client is the aggressor, that's going to go badly at some point because somebody will tell and let her start going. And then you get to go to Austin and have a conversation with some other people who never met you before about why it is you're having sex with your client. And I can tell you what the answer is going to be. It doesn't matter what your answer is. It will not be right. It will not be appropriate. They will take your license from you and will not hesitate. As well they should. Would you want to go see a therapist you had heard was having sex with his or her clients? That just sounds kind of funky to me. Again, I'm not saying that there are not clients who are attractive. Different strokes for different folks. That doesn't mean anybody should jump in the sack with them. This ethic, from the ethics code, let's just say that's a no-no. Should you have any sort of what's called a dual relationship? Some of those are unescapable. I live in a little bitty town called Nocona. I've had pastoral relationships with some of those people in Nocona. I've also had therapeutic relationship with some of those individuals in Nocona. What do I do with them when I see them at the grocery store?
Pretend you don't know anything about the therapy session.
At the very least, that's what I do. If I come across a client in Wichita Falls, that I saw one 2 weeks ago. I couldn't remember her name, but I assessed her last month. She did not exist. She is invisible to me. Now, in Nocona, if I see Bessie at the grocery store, I'm probably going to say hey to Bessie, especially if it's been pastorally motivated. If that person has been a member of a church that I have pastored at some level or other, I'm sure enough going to speak. Is it going to appear odd to them? Normally not. I've had therapeutic/pastoral relationship with a handful of individuals over there, and we sat in the same place, in the same group of folks at the high school football game. Was that awkward for us? Not at all. Did anybody else know about it? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But it didn't seem to bother those other individuals. Bless you.
Thank you.
But again, some of those things are just not ethically appropriate. You don't have dual relationships, mainly because of the power differential. You always set up a fee unless you arrange on the front end not to have a fee. If you set up a fee and the client can't pay that, you probably ought to negotiate a better fee. Or at the very least, a different fee. Things like that. All kinds of ethical issues come up with the therapeutic models that you use, who you're with, who you're not with, what's sacred and what's not sacred, what the court can tell you to do. Can be troubling for therapists. Grown Bessie, goes to court for whatever reason, and the judge says, Dr. Hamilton, bring her documents and come to court on this day, and I get served a subpoena. You know what I better do? I better show up at the courthouse. Now, what I'm going to do the first time, I'm going to show up at the courthouse without the documents. Because my first rule is to take the side of my client and to guard that person's confidentiality. Now, chances are in that circumstance, two things are going to happen. One of two things. The judge is going to say, okay, that's fine. Or the judge is going to say, bring me the paper. And what he really means is bring me the paper or go to jail. That's what he means, or she. So guess what? I'm producing paper. My job is to defend the ethics code until the law supersedes. When the law supersedes, I defer to the law. If something is ethical, I have to say this very carefully. If something is illegal, it's unethical. Make sense? That's easy. Just because it's ethical doesn't mean that it's legal. Think about that for a minute. It doesn't always work in reverse. But if it's illegal, it's certainly unethical. But there are some quote-unquote ethical things that theoretically might not be illegal. That doesn't mean that they're not ethical, or vice versa, however you want to look at that. You always Psychologists are to defer to the ethics code until the law says no. And then when the law says no, you give the law what the law wants, even if it outs your client. That's just the rules, the way they go. Now, I'm willing to do an awful lot for my clients. I'm not willing to go to jail. Sorry. If I have information about those clients that's going to create a very awkward circumstance for them, I'm sorry. If it has to do with their children in some sort of abuse circumstance, I should have already reported that anyway. So that's not going to be an issue. But I always caution my clients, be very careful what you tell me. Because depending on what you tell me dictates if I have to call somebody else. Have I had people want to tell me that they were abusing their kids? I had a grandma who said, my child is abusing her children. I said, then you're going to dial the 800 number right here, right now. I'll do it when I get home. And I was foolish that time and let her go. She came back a different time and said the same thing again. I said, all right. Then she brought back evidence that she really had called and narked on her own child and that the system had picked it up and started again. But what I should have done was had her call from my desk in my office right then. But I did not do that. That's my bad. But I've told more than one person, close your mouth right now. Because if you say anything else, then I'm going to be legally obligated to behave in a certain way, and you don't want me to do that. Now, is there a way to get around it? Can I help them talk about it in a way that doesn't quote unquote out them necessarily? Yeah. Is it ethically appropriate? I'm pushing the line here. And I'll be the first one to own that. It can be problematic. Years ago, as an example, I had a guy, then I'll hush. He was a member of my church. It was a pastoral issue. I got some information. He was a significant person in our church, leadership type, but he was the stepfather for a set of twins, female. And there was always something very interesting about this guy anyway, just something you couldn't quite put your finger on that just made it a little odd. You ladies know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you encounter people that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. This guy was like that. Made my hair stand up. Something about him, just off. Couldn't put your finger on it. My intuition told me what it was, but I wasn't stupid enough to step into that. I should have. But one of his twins had a bit of a breakdown at school one day, started talking. And of course, the person she's talking to picks up the phone and dials the people she's supposed to dial. So next thing you know, the police are everywhere. I got wind of it. I wasn't even in the office. So word passes fast. I got wind of it. I called my guy from seminary. This is what's happening. What the heck? And he said, first, call him and bring him to your office. So I did. Got in touch with him, come to my office, and he did. And I did exactly what I was told to do. Called him by his name, said, I'm about to speak. You are not to speak. At no point are you allowed to speak while I'm talking. I had his attention. I have heard X, Y, and Z. If you go to your home at this moment, there will likely be police at your house prepared to arrest you. He started talking, do not talk, because whatever you say then becomes problematic. He went home and he got arrested. Sure did. Went to court. He had been messing with those two girls for a number of years, and they finally just had all they wanted.
Okay, so you talking to him, telling him not gonna go home, it's gonna do what?
I didn't tell him not to go home.
You told him if he go home, the police is gonna be there. But
You
why
were
did
just
you?
warning him?
I'm sorry?
Were you just warning?
No, I wasn't warning him. I was telling him to go get arrested. Because if he didn't go home, then I would have had to call them myself. But he didn't give me any information. I just told him to go home. And he figured out real fast that his best option at the moment was to go home. Because they were going to come get him anyway. Whether it was in my office or whether he was at home or at his job. They were going to come get him someplace. There was only 3 places he was going to be. And he went home and got arrested. And he went to jail for 5 to 10 years. What had nothing to do with me. I never got called into the court. None of that really mattered in my world. I went to see him in jail. And he was mad because he was glad that I came, and he knew I was coming. But he had been allotted a certain amount of time, and when I got there, they cut that time in half. And he was angry that he was only going to get however long, and I didn't give him that long. But again, there are certain things that come up in therapeutic relationships that can be very problematic. I've been accused of trying to snatch people's wives from them. I've had a stalker, more than one. And when I say stalk, I mean stalk. Come to my house, leave gifts on my front porch, write letters, all kinds of fun stuff. And I managed that okay, just fine, until my wife got mad. And then she frightened my kids. She frightened my children, and Rebecca blew a gasket. And her blowing a gasket, we're calling the police. So we did. Come to find out, she had a wonderful little shrine built in her house. Had pictures of me that she had taken from the windows at her house. She could see the backside of my house from hers. I would walk out my back door, and she'd be peeking out her window watching for me. She would drive by, all kinds of strange stuff. We'd come to the house and leave gifts on the front porch. She eventually started in the letters that she would write, which were all in Spanish. We had them translated, and they were freaking crazy. She referred to Rebecca as the Dragon Lady. She called me the king, and that we were, in essence, going to ride off into the sunset together, which just cracked me up. She didn't do that much for me. But when the cops went to her house to arrest her, there were pictures of me across her dresser. Like I said, a little shrine thing built up on her dresser. One was married. Husband would come in and out of Mexico periodically. But we finally figured out, I was doing supervision then. I wasn't degreed and didn't have my license or anything like that. So my supervisor said, diagnose her. I said, what? He said, tell me what's wrong with the woman. So I went to poking around, looking. There's a particular disorder for it. He helped me find the right diagnosis, and it fit perfectly. Everything was fine, but she eventually was arrested. She did go to jail. They let her out on certain conditions, and then she couldn't drive by my house. She couldn't be anywhere where either one of my children were going to be. In other words, she couldn't go to a school function. My younger daughter was still in school, as were her children. She could not be at the same place where my daughter was. Her kids are no. She could not drive by our house to go to school. She had to go a different route, all kinds of stuff. And she complied with that. But at some point, she started stalking again. So I picked up my phone and called my little JP friend, said, come get her. And he said, okay, So they came and arrested her again, took her to jail. And she finally got the message that time. We did change houses, and she didn't know where we went, but she knows where we live now. She actually drove by and stopped. I had got out of the car, under the carport, was walking in the back gate, and she stopped. So I know exactly that she knows exactly where we are, but she's only been by the house once. I'm always watchful for her. Always. You walk into the grocery store after church on Sunday, and she'd follow me around the grocery store. With Rebecca with me, she'd follow me around the grocery store. Oh yeah, it was a little freaky. It sure was. Crazy stuff happens when people have emotional and mental issues, and you have to be prepared to take that on. And sometimes that's just the way it rolls. Anyway, any curiosities that you might have about other sorts of interventions besides to carry a weapon? Remind me sometime. I'll tell you about the guy with the butcher knife. I may have already told you that story, though. Probably did. Anything else today?
Don't forget to unlock.
Oh, yeah, I need to, what was I going to unlock?
14.
Yeah, I'm going to unlock the stuff early. I got to set it up for you. Okay, no worries.